Council, and thank you very much, everybody, for attending tonight. Also live streaming, the people who are watching from the comfort of their home. And I would like to start by acknowledging that we're meeting on land of the Gadigal and Wongal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to Aboriginal elders past and present. In the spirit of open, accessible and transparent government, the council meetings of Inner West Council are live streamed on Council's website. The camera is focused on the front of the chamber and will not be focused on the speakers or the public. By speaking at a council meeting, however, members of the public agree to being recorded and must ensure their speech to the council is respectful and uses appropriate language. A person using defamatory, discriminatory or offensive language may be exposed to liability, for which council takes no responsibility. Any part of the meeting that is held in closed session will not be streamed but will be recorded for the purpose of verifying the accuracy of the minutes. There will be no closed session items tonight. In terms of declarations of interest, I declare I have no declaration of interest in any matter listed on the business paper. And I do move and declare carried the minutes of the council meeting which were held on the 28th of March. This meeting is, as all our meetings, governed by the Code of Meeting Practice of the former Leichhardt Council. In terms of what that says in relation to speakers from the public, we do actively encourage open council meetings where members of the public can speak for up to 3 minutes on items listed on the agenda and for up to a 1-minute extension if required. We have conducted a voluntary registration system for speakers for tonight's meeting. Those people who have registered will be given priority in the speaking order when the agenda item is discussed. And then any other speakers who wish to speak on that item may speak. So that takes me to item 1 on the agenda, which is the minutes of the Council Advisory Committee meetings held firstly for the Implementation Advisory Group on the 6th of April, and then the minutes of the Local Representation Advisory Committee held on the 11th of April. I do have one registered speaker, which is John Stamoulis, and I will ask John to speak on this item.
I'd like to start by congratulating our council and council officers on a very dignified Anzac service yesterday morning. It was very, very well done. Now, to the point in hand, I'd just like to seek an amendment to the item 1, the Parramatta Urban Road Transformation Strategy. The Stamoulis-Breen amendment was that the Inner West Council LRAC agrees. That's point 2 of that motion was the Stamoulis-Breen amendment, and that in particular was my major concern, that I felt that the funding of $189 million for the infrastructure program was absolutely poor. I think our residents are shocked by such a tiny amount for the Parramatta Road Urban Transformation Strategy, so therefore I put that up as the amendment. The further amendment that you've attributed to Stamoulis-Breen, I think belongs to somebody else, and you may need to ask the minute taker who that was. Additionally, I'm very pleased in regard to the community resourcing policy and I'm hoping it will be approved tonight by the administrator. That is point 4, that the community resourcing policy will be revised. Sorry, was it point 4? Sorry, no, it's a dot point where it says that we will allow the free use of our community facilities for those groups that prior to the merger had access, such as a lot of our community groups and our precincts. So I'm hoping that passes tonight. It will be a very positive thing. Thanks.
Thank you. John, I'd just like to clarify the first point about the Parramatta Road strategy for the minute taker. So could you, unless you were able to get that read, can you just clarify the point about the Parramatta Road strategy, please?
Yes. Point 2 of the motion, the Inner West Council, LRAC, agrees that the provision of 198 million, that point 2 was actually the Stamoulis amendment. A further amendment there, that council report back to the June LRAC meeting on timelines, I think may have been somebody else's amendment, just to be tight with the record keeping there.
Okay.
It may have been Breen Stamoulis, but it wasn't initiated by me. The point 2 was. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Did anybody else want to speak on this item? So, Lucille, do you want to speak on this item?
Just to say, I believe that was accepted by the mover as and the mover and seconder, and it became part of the motion.
So you're confirming that that's correct record? Okay.
That's as I recall, so I'm just for the benefit of it. And while I'm here, could I also thank Council for the Inner West Council for their work towards the Ashfield Anzac Day service on Sunday, which was an excellent, and the commemoration of the new plaque that went there to the more recent campaigns. Thanks.
So, look, what I'm doing now is noting these minutes. I think what we'll do, John, is at the next LRAC meeting, where the minutes will be formally adopted by LRAC, we will talk to you in between and see if there is any amendment required that we can then take to that next LRAC meeting. But we'll talk to you offline about that. Okay, so with that discussion, I am noting those minutes and moving to item 2, which is the Westconnex update report. I do have speakers for that. I've got firstly Leslie Treleaven. Leslie? Yep, if you would like to speak on this item. Item 3, the Westconnex report.
Okay. Thank you, Mr Administrator. My name is Leslie Treleaven. I speak tonight as the convener of Camperdown residents aware of Westconnex and representing its members. Briefly, there are 3 issues that I'd like to speak to. Firstly, we support the Council's proposal to reduce from 4 lanes to 3 lanes in each direction. There's obviously less commitment to expanding dependence on cars and motorways. It will take less time to build, and therefore the community is exposed to less safety, health concerns, and also lower taxpayer costs. And thirdly, 4 lanes each way would clearly make more spoil and accentuate the local problems. The second issue I'd like to raise in respect of item 2 is the impact of a mid-tunnel dive site proposed at Camperdown. Now, those of you that know the site, the trucks would presumably, from the draft plan, come east along Parramatta Road in the left-hand lane. They would turn left with their dog, the truck and the dog, 20-tonne trucks approximately, would turn left into the site that's approximately where Camperdown Fitness is. They would then swing round, pick up their spoil, and then come out onto Piermont Road on the left, turning west. They would then come up from Piermont Bridge Road up to Parramatta Road where there are traffic lights, and then hopefully they would turn right west along Parramatta Road. Now, if you know that route, the concerns are that First of all, it's in an area of extremely high density. Now, Westconnex has said, oh, we're not demolishing any houses. They are going to leave, I think, 4 tenanted houses on the corner of the dive site, which must be just as bad as St Peter's and everywhere else. But there's very high density. There's between 5-storey and 12-storey units close in the area. There's also public housing that goes up to at least 9 levels, as I recall. When it comes to residents, there's issues related to health, safety, traffic, and rat running. But there's also very specific issues in relation to the congestion that will be caused to commuter buses, which currently come down in that left-hand lane. Is that my 3 minutes?
That's 3 minutes.
Oh.
Would you like another minute?
I'd definitely like another minute.
Please
Thank
keep
you.
going, Leslie.
Okay. There's the issue of queuing of trucks and dogs, backing up, jammed traffic along Parramatta Road, rat running because people are coming into a very congested Parramatta Road, rat running through Glebe, Annandale, Camperdown, and over on the other side of Newtown. The hours of work issues, how will ambulances get in and out of RPA? If not through rat running, then through the congestion of rat running. Now, I need also to make a third point, and this is very brief. I need to express CRAW's complete opposition to dive sites, the M4, M5, and the whole of the Westconnex project. We'd like to place on record that there is an opportunity to look at alternatives, such as using tunnels in trains, and to note that the Civilising Westconnex exhibition at Uni of New South Wales redesign, refine and restructure is certainly one of those possibilities, and its exhibition has just finished, but it's looking for a home, and what better place than here? Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. The next speaker I have on the pre-registered list is John Lozano. John Stamoulis.
Thank you. I just had a couple of brief questions. There'll be a significant investment in traffic modelling studies, as there should be, and it's vital for our community that these be done. I would like to seek some information about VLC as to whether we think that they are the most appropriate, or possibly they're the only ones who can do this sort of modelling, but I'd like to find the answer to that. And also, what would be the brief given to them and what would be the study areas? So that's my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Did anybody else want to speak on this item? Yes, sir. You will. I'm going to, at the end of this item, John will come back to that issue.
Oh, thank you. My name is Richard Dudley-Smith. I'm from the No Westconnex Annandale group, and I did talk last month about the pollution associated with this disastrous project. The thing that I am aware of is that certain people have been sent or have gone down to have a look at the University of New South Wales's exhibition, and I believe that they were taken through the exhibition. I'm not entirely sure about that, but I do know that they had at least an hour or maybe an hour and a half down at the exhibition, and I'd be very interested to know, and I think the community would be very interested to know what their findings were, because from the video that is available of Justice Kirby and Terry Lee Williams discussing this with Professor Wirrock, It's quite abundantly obvious that their solution is far, far better than this disastrous 1950s project. And in fact, their solutions are along the lines, no, they're not in an exact copy, but they're along the basic structural lines of projects that have been put forward by the eco-transport system. Both of these proposals are the sort of thing that we should definitely be looking at, unless, of course, all we're interested in doing is letting big companies take over the whole of our social structure, which is the situation that we have at the moment. And I note that today in the Australian, there was a big article about all the major financial companies that are involved in trying to grab parts of this whole project for their own benefit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Other speakers, or John Lozano, if you're ready to go, I think you're it.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and good evening, unelected administrator. I have read your council's points showing general opposition to the proposed modification of the Secretary's Environmental Impact Assessment requirements for Stage 3, and I support the council's general opposition, but believe that they do not go far enough. You mentioned if there was some feedback that you would like to include, and I have some proposals that I would like you to consider including in your submission. There has been significant changes in the initial Stage 3 design, and that there has been no mention of the impacts to the underlying design or financial position of this project. Traffic modelling was based on a tunnel with 3 entry-exit points. With Camperdown removed, how can this not affect the premise of the original business case? The budget began at 10 billion, it is now 17 billion. I find it hard to believe that there has been no further shift given the amount of modifications that are planned. If you apply a simple pub test to this, how many builders would let you change so much on your house without actually raising the cost of the project? The answer is none. The additional Roseville property acquisitions and the extra cost of the increased tunnel width alone should now have passed this project beyond the $20 billion mark. The original traffic modelling was based on those entry-exit ramps located at Camperdown. So SMC must have undertaken new traffic modelling after this option was removed. It would be good to see that traffic modelling publicly available, but I don't hold my breath on that one. This traffic modelling would have had to have been done to ensure that the loads at St. Peter's, the increased traffic loads at St. Peter's and Roselle, would be accommodated with their current designs. Have they actually changed their design in that regard, keeping the remaining 2 entry and exit ramps at the same dimensions whilst increasing the middle bit? Seems like a folly to me, but then again it fits in with the rest of the project, a total folly. With no entry and exit ramps at Camperdown and an increased tunnel capacity, they must have undertaken studies to ensure that the increased pollution levels alone in that tunnel do not now exceed safe standards. So, increased capacity, increased traffic, increased pollution. Is there going to be an increase in the amount of exhaust stacks that are planned for this Stage 3? And if not, is there going to be any modifications to the dimensions of the planned exhaust stacks for Stage 3? Any change to the stacks will mean a change to the surface footprint. Any change to the surface footprint means more acquisitions of houses and therefore a financial impact to the budget. There are some outstanding issues that Council has not one minute further, please. There are some outstanding issues that the council has not provided an update on for quite some time. I refer in particular to the land acquisition at Reg Cody Reserve by SMC and the proposed compensation of approximately $3,000. If you recall, the last update was how council was considering the possibility of perhaps submitting an appeal to the Land Environmental Court. I'm just wondering whether the pontification has ended and the council is actually moving in any meaningful direction on that one. The other item, which other speakers have touched on, is the Civilising Westconnex. I noted that council took up my suggestion to actually visit, and I thank the council for doing that. But I would like to know what now. What are you going to propose? That exhibition is closing down. It would be great to get a further extension of that somewhere else, perhaps on council property. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, I remind you that there are only 4 months left for our unelected council to end, and we are given the privilege of casting votes yet again. So I direct my final comments to those previous councillors in the reserved seats behind me. If you believe that you will re-enter your previous positions without any public scrutiny surrounding your involvement or lack thereof in the amalgamation process, think again. Thank you.
Any other speakers on this item? Item 3, Westconnex. If not, I'm going to ask Kendall Banfield, the manager of Council's Westconnex unit, to respond to the issues raised.
On the question of whether Veitch Lister Consulting are appropriate, I've been advised by the engineer of the Westconnex unit that Veitch Lister is the only consultant that holds a model, a traffic model for Sydney for local roads. It's a private model. As is documented in the report, the RMS models main roads, not local roads. The aim of our study is to model the impact of Westconnex on local roads. So the aim of the study overall is to use RMS's strategic data and feed that into the Veitch Lister model. Part of the reason for putting the report up tonight is to advise that we need to directly appoint Veitch Lister for that reason, because they're the only company that holds the model for local roads. As to what exactly will be in the brief, I guess the basis for the brief is Council's 6 December resolution, and a detailed brief for Veitch Lister hasn't been developed yet because we're waiting for tonight for authority to negotiate with them, but that will be developed.
Kendall, just the areas covered by the traffic study as well?
Yeah, as per the 6 December resolution, it will cover all 3 stages. So it's basically the area around Haberfield, the area around Rozelle, and the area around St Peters. It was mentioned a few times from the speakers that about the Civilising Westconnex exhibition. Council staff last week went and visited that and saw that exhibition and spoke to Professor James Wearick about it, and we raised the issue about possibly hosting that exhibition, and he was receptive, although there may be logistical issues around our venues, but we'll look into that. And certainly we're taking on board the concepts around that exhibition of the metro line running through, and I think 14 possible stations along the line. And that's something we're looking into further, and we'll report on at a future meeting. In terms of comments on the Secretary's environmental requirements for stage 3, those additional comments, it was good to hear those, and we're happy to include those in a late addendum to that to the Department of Planning on that report. And yes, we'll need to take on board the query about Reg Cody Reserve, and we'll report back on that.
Okay, thank you, Kendall. That's a comprehensive response, I think, to the issues raised tonight. So we will prepare a supplementary submission on the Secretary's environmental assessment requirements to amplify some of the issues that have been raised tonight, and we will come back on Reg Cody Reserve. I have actually asked staff to prepare advice on the Civilising Westconnex concept and the feasibility of implementing that requirement. So, or those that different approach to Westconnex. So that is something that the staff will come back with a report to council on. So with those observations, I will adopt the recommendations in tonight's report on Westconnex, and I thank everybody for their contribution on that item. Move to item 4, which is, item 3. I'm one ahead of myself all night tonight, clearly. Local Traffic Committee meeting of the 6th of April, and I do have at least one speaker on that. I've got Dane McIntosh. Yep. Could you refer to the item number, Dane?
The item number is T0417, item 24. Moving of no stopping signs that border Conway Place, Unwins Bridge Road. I've been a resident of Unwins Bridge Road for I live at number 58. I've been a resident there for 22 years. In all that time, we've had the ability, the no stopping sign ends at the end of our property. The house on the corner, number 60, which corners Conway Place. We've had the ability to park out the front of our house. Now, we were given, there was an opportunity to speak at the local traffic meeting on the 6th of April, on the 5th of April, Wednesday the 5th of April. I was given 2 hours notice before the close of business the previous day that I could attend the meeting at 10 o'clock the next morning. I couldn't organise myself, work commitments to get there. Now, Mr. Andari, the traffic engineer, spoke at the local traffic committee meeting. Mr. Andari did not put down all my comments that I made. He has only selected a few. Mr. Andari, the traffic engineer, has stated that regarding the, it is a statutory requirement that you park 10 metres from an intersection. Now, Mr. Andari's only pulled out part of the road rule, I think, to suit himself. The actual road rule is that you must park 10 metres from an intersection, the corner, if there is not a stop sign there. Where we are, there is a stop sign. So why the change? He's also saying that it's mandatory. So if it's mandatory, why are we given the opportunity to speak? Why are we given the opportunity to raise it? Why wasn't it just done? Why are council rangers not booking people who are not 10 metres from an intersection? I can go anywhere along. I can go down to Sydenham Railway Station. People park right on the corner down there. Why aren't the rangers, council's paying rangers to do this work? Why aren't they doing it if it's mandatory? Mr. Dandari also stated at the council meeting there's been one incident in 5 years at this intersection. Does that make it a hot spot? I don't think so. That's not even, you know. In my letter, I made mention that the fact that the council never received complaints about this intersection until residents were inconvenienced when Westconnex once again closed off Brown Street and Florence Street while they were doing work, ripping down houses along Campbell Street. People had to come out along Conway Place. Mr. Andari, has there been any more complaints since these streets have been opened back up?
Dane, do you want an extra minute?
Yes, please. Has there been any more complaints? What's the time frame for the complaints? Were they put in? Were they put in while the roads were closed? I understand the Westconnex thing is a horrid thing. It is affecting everybody around St Peters. It's gutting our whole suburb. Mr. Andari also states that parking along Unwins Roads was moderately utilised in the morning and afternoon. He's not looked at the parking situation before and after residents have come and gone or come from work. where there is an overflow of cars attending Greenway Banks Estate, rock climbing in 1 to 900 Ridge Road. Mr Andari also recommends that the moving of signs is to deter illegal parking, improve visibility for turning motorists. 1, if people are parking illegally, book them. 2, you say you want to increase visibility, but there's a telegraph pole on the corner. There's a tree on the corner. Are you going to cut them out? You're going to move the telegraph pole? When Mr Andari, I haven't been able to get in contact with Mr Andari. He won't answer the phone. Now,
Need you to wrap up, Dane, please.
yeah, I will. If this is passed, I hope council, if they're going to take the high moral ground with this and pass this, that there is a complete audit of the inner West Council area and every intersection that doesn't meet this mandatory requirement is then fixed. I hope that there is a complete audit every street, key outcomes from this audit and a due date when this will be completed. Okay, I'd like to see that done, and I'll be pushing for that to be done.
Thank you, Dane. We'll get a response for you from the relevant officer. Thank you.
Just as well, I think it's just a need. Let's sit down and talk about it. Knee-jerk reaction. Okay.
Thanks, Dane.
Thank you.
Does anybody else want to speak on the Traffic Committee minutes? If not, I'm going to ask Wal Petchler, Group Manager, to respond.
Administrator, look, certainly acknowledge that the implementation of the no stopping zone extension is going to result in the loss of 1 parking space in front of the residents. And certainly recommendations to remove on-street parking are not made lightly. We understand the value of that to residents. Whilst a complaint may initiate an investigation is not the reason why the recommendations are made. Officers have a look at the intersection, they look at the sight distance, and they believe there is a need for safety reasons to extend the no stopping zone to the statutory minimum of 10 metres to improve that sight distance, bearing in mind Unwin's Bridge Road is a 4-lane carriageway, it's a sub-regional road, sub-arterial road, carries in excess of 20,000 vehicles a day. Vehicles exiting Conway Place do have sight distance problems, and the purpose of this is to try and improve that situation.
Can I just a further question, Wal, in relation to the statutory issue here, please?
No, if that advice was given, it was an incorrect interpretation. The road rules read that it's the statutory minimum of 10 metres is applied where it's not signposted. Where it is signposted, then the statutory requirement is to within the extent that it's signposted.
Okay. Thank you for that advice. Look, I'm always where there are safety issues that have prompted a traffic management response, I'm loath to interfere with advice that came from a unanimous decision from the Traffic Committee. I do appreciate the issues you're raising, Dane. I'm going to ask council officers to work with you as part of implementing this proposal. So, Wal, if you could please take that on board and work with Dane on that. Otherwise, I am going to adopt the recommendations of those minutes and move to the next item, which is, I thank you, Dane, for your contribution. I will ensure that the officers deal with you on it. Item 4, which is the supplementary report on the Marrickville Heritage Review. I have quite a number of speakers tonight on this item, and I'll start with, I'll just go through in order of listing, which is James Cartwright.
Good evening, Administrator and staff. I'm James Cartwright, Secretary of the Churches of Christ Property Trust, based at Rhodes, which is the owner of the property at 389 Illawarra Road, Marrickville. Thank you for the 3-minute opportunity to speak to the proposal to Council, which recommends a heritage listing of the property. The owner has provided Council with an assessment report from Greg Patch, a highly regarded architect and heritage consultant, which was referred to in, but omitted from, the papers published in respect of tonight's meeting. I trust the assessment report has now been provided to you. If not, I'd respectfully submit that any consideration of this property's listing be deferred until you've had an opportunity to consider that report. Mr Patch's view in his report is that the building is of minimal significance in the context of the local government area as a whole. He also points out that the church cannot be seen in the round in any meaningful sense, and in terms of the public domain is more or less a facade within the streetscape. The 2011 LEP currently lists some 21 churches, including one nearby at 388 Illawarra Road. In the scope of things, the listing of a building as modest as the church at 389 Illawarra Road would seem to be superfluous. Council's heritage consultant architect considers the building meets the criteria of historical significance, aesthetic significance and representativeness. These are subjective matters. Council has before it opinions of two experts that differ. Neither opinion is conclusive, such that there is real room for doubt in respect of the appropriateness of the proposed listing. On balance, it is in these circumstances that the owner respectfully submits that the appropriate course is to confine any heritage listing to the facade of the building. There are valid reasons for this approach. The building has lost its design integrity and there is precedent for confining the listing to the facade. The treatment of the properties at number 10 and number 47 Carrington Road, Marrickville, in that regard comes to mind. Listing the facade would meet all of the New South Wales Heritage Assessment criteria identified by Mr Hall. It is only the facade, in fact, that meets the required aesthetic characteristics and or the required technical achievement, which form part of that criteria. The balance of the building does not do so. The other criteria would also be met by the listing of the facade. For these reasons, it is submitted that all of the elements of heritage significance which support a listing, historical, cultural and spiritual, would be satisfied by listing the facade only. The proof of that proposition is that without the presence of the facade, the listing of the building would clearly not be being contemplated by council. It would be antithetical to the heritage assessment criteria to list the whole of the building. It is in these circumstances that the Trust presses Council to limit any heritage listing to the facade of the building only. The Trust respectfully asks that you give due consideration to these matters and limits any listing as requested by the Trust. Thank you, with 1 second to spare.
Good timing, James. Thank you for that. I will confirm that I have received your supplementary report and have reviewed it. So just to clear that point up. Andrew Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr Administrator and Senior Council staff. I represent Mr and Mrs Newen in relation to 149 Unwins Road, which is recommended for a deferral and a $5,000 grant and a continuation of the draft heritage listing. We oppose all three proposals, and if I might just hand out a brief handout to you, which is a chronology and a review of our supplementary submission. While it's being done, I'll speak to it. The chronology, thank you very much. It's in two sections, each of which is stapled. It shows that this issue has been continuing since the 14th of July last year, with today's background report on page 74 saying there is a lack of certainty regarding many aspects of this proposal for this property which relate to its overall heritage significance. In other words, Council is unsure of whether it really should proceed at this stage. We say it should not. And Graham Hall notes his concerns on page 130 to 132 of your report, and the Council staff, or the author who wrote it, admits the errors on pages 130 and 32. A good decision is based on the 3 C's: clarity, certainty and consistency. And this proposal for heritage listing, or even deferral, does not meet those. Attached to the first section of the document, beyond the chronology, I list the 17 anachronisms, errors, inconsistencies that relate to the proposal put forward by Council in its report. And it's very clear that there's no confirmed date for construction, there's no date, there's no firm evidence that Mr Hugh Harrison was a quarry master and who owned the actual site, who actually built it. All that is either guesswork or just conjecture.
And so for that reason, it cannot be the basis of saying that the building has heritage or social or cultural or technical or aesthetic significance. In our supplementary report, in which I list on 4 pages why the proposal should not proceed, I basically say that the information required to make a valid decision has not been properly provided. There's no valid reasons for deferral or extension sought. Our 63-page report is quite detailed. We had to go to additional expense to complete it within the very tight 20-day deadline that we were given. That cost our client, Mr. Nguyen, a lot of money. But it will, even then, the home was not previously proposed for listing in Council's 1986 study. And Council has had ample opportunity to request further information from us if that was required, but has not done so. If I may have a brief 1-minute extension. In addition, we note Mr. Graham Hall's, your consultant, has obviously raised concerns, and the author now says that they want to delete the reference to Mr. Hugh Harrison and his reference to ownership of the site. That puts in doubt the whole basis on which the proposal was put forward. In addition, they now say that there's no evidence where Mr. Harrison actually lived, and say he might have lived in Renwick Street, which is a very, very long street. And there's nothing been provided to show that he actually worked in the quarry from which he was meant to have taken the sandstone, from which he was meant to have built his own house. There are 12 houses within 500 metres that we locate in our report that show that there are much more substantial sandstone houses in the area. This is not a rare building. So we say Council is not satisfied its owners of proof. Its historical methodology is flawed, and it should not proceed to individually heritage list or as a draft heritage item, and the further ratepayer funds allocated would be a waste of money. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Wynne? Thank you. Kevin Lamb?
My name's Kevin Lamb. I represent the owner of 51 Frederick Street, St Peters, Quackland Mar. Per the latest supplementary report, in response to my latest submission, Council's Heritage Advisor once again dismisses my claim regarding the structural crack across the entire length on the front of a building above a veranda roof. However, upon closer inspection, it is very plain and clear to see that there is a structural crack in the brickwork and not just the rendering. The structural cracks are so severe that even a layperson without any knowledge or expertise in building and construction can see that there is an issue with the structural integrity of a building. It is extremely frustrating that the issues I raise are continually dismissed or ignored. The consultant also raises the issue that I did not provide an actual quote. In response to this, I would like to ask Council if it is necessary for me to obtain one, and if so, will this assist my case? Let me remind everyone that not all builders and tradespersons offer free quotes, especially for jobs that are unlikely to eventuate. So I personally feel like it is unnecessary to waste more of our own money and time to engage a builder for a written quote if Council and their heritage consultant are just going to dismiss it anyway. Yet here I am being obliged to obtain one. Another imposition on us which we did not ask for courtesy of this unnecessary heritage listing proposal. I'll now refer to some of the issues I raised in my submission, which were not addressed at all. Firstly, during my first on-site meeting with a council heritage consultant, it was indicated to me that they would be seeking only to preserve the front facade of a building. However, the post-exhibition report recommends that the front and side of a building be retained. The council heritage consultant failed to address this issue at all in the supplementary report. Next issue is that of the financial assistance available to heritage-affected landlords that council and their heritage consultant keep attempting to entice us with. I ask council now, of the additional $100,000 in preservation costs we would be up for due to this listing, how much of this would we actually receive in assistance? Council staff has already admittedly indicated that any financial assistance would be minimal, yet we, the landlord, are expected to just accept the financial burden involved with this listing being imposed upon us. I think it would be only fair that if council insists on proceeding with this listing without our consent, then all additional expenditure incurred due to the listing restrictions should be borne by the council and not the landlord. I remind everyone that we did not ask for this. It is completely unfair to force this upon us. I also bring to your attention to the point that it makes absolutely no economic sense to be spending ratepayers' funds on financial assistance to heritage-affected landlords to preserve an irrelevant building that is already so defective in its structural integrity. Heritage listing our property actually provides no economic benefit to the community and instead is a financial detriment. I'm sure these funds could be well spent in other much-needed areas in the community. Other issues I raised which went unaddressed include the examples I provided of... Extension, please.
Another minute, yep.
Other issues I raised which went unaddressed includes the examples I provide of properties which had heritage listing proposals rejected for the government's own benefit. There was also another property in the direct vicinity of ours that is of similar state, yet failed to make it on this proposal. Once again, I reiterate how we feel like we are being bullied into this proposal. Our concerns are continually dismissed or ignored, and we feel like the extended period for consultation has not made any actual productive developments at all, other than delay the council's decision on the proposal. I cannot even begin to express how stressful it has been throughout this entire unnecessary process of having the proposal hanging over our heads. It is so unfair that this is allowed to proceed without our consent. We never asked for this, nor do we want it, yet it can be forced upon us, and we are expected to accept the financial burden imposed. It's not right, and it doesn't make sense. I beg of the council to please show some empathy and reconsider this proposal on our premises.
Thank you. Bruce Wolfe.
Thank you, Mr Administrator and Senior Council staff. I'm speaking on behalf of Mr Vulas with the proposal for 294 Livingston Road, Marrickville. The Council report recommending the listing refers to financial issues raised by Mr Vulas but provides no response to those issues. The proposal to list ignores Mr Vulas's circumstances and the circumstances of his ownership. He's owned the property for over 45 years. If the property is in a fit state for consideration for heritage listing, then this is because of, not despite, Mr Vulas's ownership. He has seen neighbours' properties approved for all manner of development. He asks, well, what's his reward from the council? Those properties are not listed, but his property, where he's looked after the property, is penalised by the proposed listing. It's clear that, in fact, conserving the property doesn't require listing, because if it's thought fit for conservation, he has looked after the property. The heritage consultant's reply in the report completely sets aside any consideration of financial hardship or financial considerations at all. It deals only with heritage issues. He expressly says that. It doesn't deal at all with the financial circumstances or Mr Vulas's circumstances. My submission is that you shouldn't adopt that approach. You shouldn't accept that approach. It's one thing for the heritage consultant to say, well, I'm considering heritage. That's what I have to consider. How this affects the person is not my concern. That's the express terms or the effect of this heritage report. It's completely different for you as council. All that you have before you is the heritage consultant report, and you should not make a decision to include this property without considering the issues personal to Mr Vulas, a pensioner, personal to the owner of the property. Each owner's situation is different. The Heritage Act for state heritage listing expressly requires consideration of financial factors and consequences when raised by an owner, when a property is considered for state heritage listing. These factors should not be just dismissed out of hand, discounted and ignored by council. That's what's happening here. Mr Vulas strongly objects to the listing. He's very concerned about it. It affects him. There's no evidence of any threat to the building. The same situation exists now as it has for the last 45 years. Mr. Voulas asks that you not include his property in the listed properties in the planning proposal. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you. James Phillips.
My name's James Phillips and I'm a heritage consultant, and I was asked by Mr. Voulas to look at his property, and I want to make some observations regarding heritage listing. Local heritage listing only requires that a house or a place meet one of the Heritage Office criteria for listing. So it's a very broad category for listing. And what it means is that I could really, as a professional heritage consultant, write a report about my glasses, and I could find at least one category of the heritage criteria to get that listed in quite a meaningful way. The problem is that the statement of significance and the research done in potential listing for this property is very limited, and it makes a certain set of assumptions that categorise it for listing that I think are false and inappropriate. The house was built by a master builder. Well, lots of houses are built by master builders all over Sydney. I don't believe that the construction of a house by a master builder warrants heritage listing. Almost every house within the Marrickville estate provides evidence of re-subdivision and the subdivision of Marrickville. This is, again, not a sufficient criterion for listing. The house is a good example of its period. Again, I'm quoting from the report, just as there are other houses surrounding it of its period that are good houses. It has features that are common with many houses in the local government of that area of that period. These features on their own collectively do not justify listing. And construction of a house by its owner does not warrant listing. Listing is something that you look for something special or something unusual or something that contributes to the history of the area. And Marrickville was in the forefront of this in 1986 when it produced its heritage study, a document I've used continuously over. My copy is very well worn. This house wasn't part of the Marrickville Heritage Study, and it hasn't been selected for listing since. I note in the current listing there are 75 items up for listing. Are there really 75 items that have been missed so far? I think it's quite fair that if you found a house that was built in the 1950s, that now the fashion for looking at houses that are more modern would come up for listing and be a very sensible way of dealing with things, or a house from the 60s or something unusual down a lane or hidden by some other buildings. But this is on a prominent corner. How come this hasn't been found before? Is Mr. Voulas going to go through this every 5 years when you renew the LEP? Someone's going to come past as a consultant, do a drive-by shooting of his house and say this should be a heritage item, do a very few hours, if that, of research on the house, and then put Mr. Voulas to the trouble of having to wait.
Would you like another minute?
Please, some considerable time to find out what's going to happen to his house. I think this is a really unfair impost by way of procedure, and intellectually and technically as a way of dealing with heritage, it's a very unsound process. Marrickville has over 300 heritage items and 36 heritage conservation areas. Where's the new heritage to be discovered in Marrickville? I mean, what part of stone in Marrickville has been unturned by heritage? I just find this is a very, very poor way of dealing with a house that's quite prominent. People can see it, and yet it hasn't been discovered. It wasn't discovered in 1986 and hasn't been discovered subsequently. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have Try Win in relation to 51 Frederick Street.
Excuse me, Richard.
Yes, Morris.
I put my name to speak in 294 Barry.
Oh, I thought you wanted to speak at the end of all speakers. Yeah? Oh, yeah, I will call you, Morris. Yep. Please go ahead.
Good evening, Mr. Chairperson. Thank you for hearing what I have to say. Look, I'm all for, preservation and protecting, our history and all, but the matter here is we've bought into this property before any of this happened, and let's be honest, like Sydney is a growing market. The reason why we bought into this property was, the intention to develop it, to grow it, and 5 years on, we find out, oh no, this place needs to be listed for preservation. We're all for that, but right now, there's two issues right now. Firstly, the short-term issue. To keep this place ongoing and, in a quality where someone can live in it, but still be preserved for heritage listing, it's going to cost us over $100,000. Who's going to cover those costs? So that's a cost that we have to bear, and we didn't know this coming into this matter. The second issue that we have here is by listing this property for heritage, we're not going to be able to develop in the future. So we're going to be missing out on potential income for potential profit for our future, right? So, I've spoken to a lot of the neighbours in the area, and some of them are saying, yes, look, I think we should list this for heritage, it's for our children, it's for our children to enjoy in the future. But little do they know that my children, who I've worked really hard to buy this property, and my intention is to develop it and grow it so that later on they can take the property and they can, subdevelop whatever they want to do. Little do these people know that my children are suffering so that their children can have the benefit of seeing this property that's been preserved. This is the history, but it's my children that are suffering, not theirs. Does that make sense? So that concerns me. Furthermore, another issue that concerns me is Sydney is a growing market. Everything's growing and technology is growing, everything's growing. But by listing the property as heritage, it stops me from growing with the time. Like myself and my neighbours, we have every intention to go green. This is the general consensus in our community. But if we keep this building heritage listed, it will make it very hard and very costly for us to turn this building green. So these are things that I think the council needs to consider before they go ahead and just list a property for heritage. Furthermore, if every house on the street was being listed for heritage, I can understand, I won't argue. But not every house on that street is being listed for heritage. It's like it's being selective. So I think if you were to make my house heritage listed, it won't achieve the overall purpose that you guys are trying to achieve. Can I please have another minute?
Yes, you could.
Yep. So I think if you guys were to go back and say, yeah, let's list this whole street as heritage listing, I'll agree with you and I'll go for it and I'll bear the cost of that. But if you're only going to select certain houses to be listed for heritage, it's a little bit unfair. And who gets to choose which house gets to be listed and which house doesn't? Who gets to choose whose family will suffer and whose family won't? And like I said, it's my blood, sweat and tears that bought into this property. I want to develop it and make money for myself for the future. But if I can't, I want my children to. By doing this, you're really impacting my future, my children's future, but also that of my neighbours. And even if the property next to me isn't heritage listed, the chances of my children, their children becoming friends and wanting to join the properties together and develop in the future, that won't be possible. So my question is, who gets to choose something like this? If you're going to list it for heritage, do it across the whole street. Don't be selective about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Miles Hannah.
Okay, thanks, Richard. I'm going to speak now as we used to speak when I was a councillor in Marrickville Council. When any of the residents approach us, we try to do the best for them. That's why they put us in the seat. Anyway, I went and have a look in 294, and by the way, the officer in the top put 294, in the bottom put 249, but the address is 294. I went to have a look in the house. I cannot see much difference between a lot of houses in Marrickville. Secondly, I never know that before, any time before that, we put houses heritage because one of the master builder, and one of the name of the builder he built it was a famous builder. This not because the house really suits the heritage. Heritage to me, it's mean something. It's hard to be built now, not like before. But now we only putting it because one famous gentleman, architect or whatever he was, he built the house. Very nice. And one thing here, the officer in his report he acknowledged that it's going to cost more if the owner want to do something, because the owner, he's a pensioner. The officer, he got a very, very nice heart. He said, we will give him discount 50% if you put any application in the council. Big deal. What the application will be? 10,000 to what? He will take 5,000. I give you example about when you're talking about someone fixing something heritage. House in David Street, his heritage house. He want to replace his fence. He bought someone, he got a quotation for $15,000. It ended costing him $40,000. And that's what we wait to do to our residents. Another things, there are, when you put something heritage, you just have to put in your mind, there are house in the corner of Marrickville Road, and just a minute. Which is staying in 1,000 square meter, the house, it's sold for $2,400,000. Okay, compare, because it's listed heritage, compared to a semi in Charles Street, only 190 square meter sold for $101,500,000. See the difference? That's what we want to do to our resident after they living hard. This gentleman has been living in this house for more than 42 years. You go and have a look what he's doing to his house. It's fantastic. I went to have a look twice. He got planning tree, planning nice, lemon tree, planning everything. Let's please let our resident live happy in their life when they're living in Marrickville. And this is now, I find something now we're doing it like, I take
Extra minute. Yep.
We used to do spot zoning in Marrickville, which I was against it most of the time. We're doing the same now. We're making spot zoning, but instead of changing zoning, we're making them heritage. You know something? I'm going in my pamphlet, when I'm going to run in September, I'm going to tell everyone in my pamphlet, be careful who live in your house before, how build your house, because in our West Council can make it for you heritage. Is that what fair to our residents? To put who live in the house in the whole day, or who build it to. We demolish 1 or 2 houses in Marrickville. Before used to be very nice, famous people live in it, and now they demolish. Is that what we want to do for our residents? Thank you.
Thank you, Morris. Other speakers? Julie Passos.
Good evening. Nice to see you all. He's all aged a little bit.
That's what time does to you.
Yes. Now, I came up especially to speak on this issue because it's an issue that's very close to my heart. On the former Asheville Council, I fought tooth and nail against the forced heritage listing of people's properties. I believe the LEP was flawed, and I've raised it since that it needs to be revisited. Now, we are now a new entity. We are an amalgamated council. And I moved to defer all these type of things till the new council was elected, and a uniform exercise was done on the whole Inner West Council, because there is a lot to look at and there's a lot to take off that should never have been listed. In today's Courier, one of the articles starts off with mismanagement, talking about Asheville Council. That's the start. The LEP 13 in Nashville was so flawed, people were treated so horrendously. I won't let it go. Till my dying day, I will fight it. I have respect for heritage with merit, not heritage for political reasons and to justify someone's existence. In the business paper tonight on the agenda, there's a recommendation to demolish 2 houses that the former Leichhardt Council owned for car parking. And a lot of photos saying that the homes are in disrepair, not worth doing them up, this and that. It doesn't matter, they are heritage and they're not listed. It doesn't make any difference. You can't pick and choose what you want. Then we say this house has to be listed as heritage because a former mayor lived in it. Well, if you go back and look at some of the new articles on former mayors, I would rather demolish the house and not look at it than to remember them. So I don't see that has any merit to list a property. And I would also like a question. I wonder if I could have an answer. The last I knew, we had a heritage architect here at Ashfield, and I want to know, is his scope is only in the former Ashfield municipality, or does he look at all the heritage items in the amalgamated council? Because I don't seem to see a report from him. And I'm also not 100%, but the property's been demolished in Marrickville Road and Livingston, where there's going to be quite a large development that was approved by Marrickville Council. I was led to believe that one of the owners of those properties was the first Labor Treasurer of New South Wales, State Labor Treasurer. So I would
Extra minute, Julie.
One more minute. I would go along saying that a Labor Party Treasurer is not somebody to keep a house for, but either is a builder. So, and on the other aspect of it, council also has to have a heart. Council is just not figures and papers. We have to have a heart. We have to look at all issues. Will the world come to an end if this guy's property is not listed as heritage? He is an elderly man. We have to have compassion. These type of things will be revisited in the future. Let this guy have his last few years. It's not a big deal. You can't just be a council DA's recommended approval land and environment court. We must look at the human aspect of this. This is not a 25-year-old married couple going in with hidden agendas or a developer to put high-rise. Thank you. Please, let's let this old guy have a few last happy years.
Thank you, Julie. Any other speakers on this item? Item 4, Marrickville Heritage Review. No, I'm going to ask Simon Minoski, the Group Manager, to respond to issues raised from the officer's perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. I'll attempt to go through each of those items one by one, and thank you for all your comments. In relation to 389 Illawarra Road, the report was provided to the Administrator this afternoon. However, it was considered as part of the report that went to Council it's before you tonight. And I do agree that there is an element of subjectivity based on, but this subjectivity is undertaken by technical specialists, as we've heard from some this evening. The advice that's been given to council officers by its heritage consultant or heritage specialist was to look at the retention of the whole building. I am aware that as part of the initial public exhibition, part of the concern that came through to council regarding this item was about its future use of the site. There is a clause within the former Marrickville LEP 5.10, I believe, that allows flexibility in uses for heritage items beyond those uses that are permissible. There are some hurdles that need to be gone through, but there is additional flexibility for those items that are heritage listed. In relation to 149 Unwins Bridge Road, I'm aware of the positions that have been represented tonight and previously in the last few weeks in relation to this property. Staff's position at this point is that the
the information that's come through from the proponent or his representatives doesn't fully resolve some of the questions regarding the history of the property. We do acknowledge there is some conjecture around some of the material and details around what was identified in our report and our advice. The report recommends that further detailed investigations do be undertaken to resolve some of these issues. In relation to 51 Frederick Street, we realise that there may be issues with the integrity of the property, the age, in terms of historic and heritage and properties and time they've been around. There will be, with some items, issues of integrity. Part of the resolution from the February meeting was to look at how we can financially assist property owners of heritage listed properties for works or maintenance or to improve the construction integrity. I disagree with the comment that they are irrelevant buildings. And it's not only, and this goes to some of the other items also, it's not only economic issues that we need to consider as part of listing items for heritage significance, but we need to look at their value of aesthetics, their historical value, the amenity they bring, the contribution it makes to the community from a cultural values perspective as well. So it's not. I do realise there may be economic implications, but we are having to test against the historic and heritage values, and it is a selective process. There are areas that are conservation areas, which a number of items contribute to that conservation area. Heritage items are selective in their very nature because of what they contribute from a historic or cultural values perspective. In relation to 294 Livingston Road, I apologise for the error in the report in terms of the addresses there. There was no new heritage information that was provided on this property since the February report. Council's heritage officer did conclude the site satisfies 4 criteria when only one is really required for listing. He also considers the building to be an excellent example of an interwar Californian bungalow. Again, I realise from an economic perspective the issues that have been raised. And that's part of the reason why we are, as part of the resolution from the February meeting, is to work through a framework in terms of how we can financially support owners of heritage items. Yeah.
Thank you for that response. Look, I appreciate all the contributions tonight. I think we started this LEP, we had more than 70 items listed, and I think the majority we've been able to work through the process either with the support of residents or through working with them to end up in a position where they are accepting of the listing. I had hoped with these 6 items, by deferring it in February, that over the next couple of months we would have got to a better landing than we've got to tonight. After 2 months, we still clearly have some significant differences, and clearly the different heritage consultants have done their jobs diligently. Council staff have done their job very diligently, but we end up in a situation where out of an LEP with more than 70 items, we end up with 6 that are still in contention. I think some of them clearly will have heritage value, some it's more arguable. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm receptive to the idea that any further consideration of heritage values should form part of a future LEP for Inner West Council. So, Julie, don't make me change my mind. So I shall put the amended recommendation live.
I hate you then. Quick.
which will delete these items, and that any further consideration will be carried out as part of a future heritage study. I would recommend that that be part of a comprehensive LEP for council. We can never get to a point where we will get unanimity on heritage listings, but I hear sufficient questioning of the heritage values of some of these items and sufficient concern by owners and others that I'm prepared to, for the sake of an LEP that is going to significantly enhance the heritage protection in the former Marrickville area, remove these items from the LEP for future further consideration. So I thank you all for your contribution, and that's the decision that council makes. Thank you. Okay, so item 5, the Inner West Council operational plan and budget. I have Mark Drury.
Thank you, Richard, and good evening. I support the operational plan and budget going to the community for comment as it is, and I congratulate the staff for getting it to this stage. The operating plan is the first real step in the consolidation of the council. It contains $66 million of really needed and valuable capital works that will vastly improve our community. I note not all the projects from the previous councils are being progressed as quickly as some would like or expect, but we'll deal with that later. I also note that there are some projects that haven't made the cut, and I look forward to hearing community comment on that. I'm willing to entertain the notion embodied in this that we are going to be using a working capital approach as outlined in the report, and I hope that this can improve our performance in delivering projects on time. I'm also pleased to see that the capital program is based on the asset management plans of the former councils. I'm a big supporter of this approach. It leads to us taking on those assets that need work first, rather than any alternate propositions. In terms of the fees and charges, I think we've been told they increased by 2.5% largely. I think in the final report that comes to council, residents should be advised, and residents should be advised, and you should be advised, Richard, of any that are exceeding the 2.5 and for what reason. There may be good reasons. Let's just put them on the table. I think this is a good first step at consolidating and harmonising the budget. We have a long way to go as a council. And reading through this, there are some major challenges. When you look at the different rates, when you look at the different waste collections, when you look at the different ways things were charged, there's a long way to go. This is a good first step. This budget will look to expend $309 million to improve our community. Happily, we expect $309 million in income. That's a great outcome. There's a slight working fund deficit, but I don't think that's a major problem. I look forward to hearing what the community thinks.
Extra minute, Mark.
Please. I look forward to hearing what the community thinks of the operating plan and the budget and the fees and charges. I'll reserve any further comment till then. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. John Stamoulis.
Thank you. I note in the recommendation that there doesn't seem to be a plan there for community consultation. I think there's an opportunity here as it's the very first budget that's really been put together in this way, that our community will be interested in some of the processes involved in doing that, as well as the budget itself. And I wonder whether or not an amendment could be made that in each of the old municipalities that a session could be presented. So that's my first point. My second point is that I thought council were pretty game with their very first table on page 234 or page 3 of the report, showing a table there with major falls in funding across our capital works programs over the 4 years ahead. And I wonder whether or not that could be briefly explained here at the meeting tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Any other speakers on the budget? No. Oh, sorry, Lucille, sorry.
I apologise that I didn't get round to putting my name down to speak. Page 298, I think I was on when I jumped up. Thank you for this report, and I'll reiterate the comments that that Mark Drury has made in relation to a good first step, and we'll be interested to see what happens after the community's had a look at it. There are a few issues that I raised with council officers today, and I've had clarified. So, but one issue on page 297, Library and History Services, that really concerned me. There's a very long list here of activities that are to be carried out by that particular group of people. One of the things about the Inner West is that we really do value our history. We have really strong and active history organisations across the area, and while both Leichhardt and Marrickville councils former Leichhardt and Marrickville councils have had mergers in the past, Ashfield Council has not been subject to a merger before, and I think that we should have some comment here in relation to how we're going to manage to preserve the history of the three former councils. There's many tasks here, but there's nothing that even reflects on who's going to be responsible, how it's going to be managed, what's going to happen to the various archives or anything, and that all needs to be sorted out and worked out, and that really can't be left for another year or two and find that a lot of the valuable things have been lost. And I know that over the years that former councils, and I certainly know there was some stories about things that were lost at Marrickville Council with former mergers when things like mayoral chains couldn't even be found. So I think it's really important that this is taken on board. Many people will probably be made redundant, and there's surely people there that could be used to work in this area. And I would implore the General Manager to make sure that this history is preserved and cared for. Ashfield Council is well known for being a place that had very, very sound archives, and we would really like to see that that's not lost.
Thank you, Lucille. Yep. Thank you. Any other speakers on the budget? So I'm going to ask either Michael or I'm going to ask Pav, the group manager and CFO, to respond. No, yeah.
Through the administrator, just in regard to Mr. Stamoulis's comment in regards to funding source of the capital works, we just wanted to make it transparent in regards to the allocation of funding sources of how our capital works were being funded, so we could have a look and see that there were a number of capital grants being funded. We were showing that the working funds were funding a large portion of the capital works program, and that we were using depreciation to fund our capital works program. So it was just about transparency and opening it up. So that was there anything further in regards to an explanation on that, Mr. Smollis, or? Okay. Just to answer that, there is a number of accelerated works going on. We do have the $15 million from the Stronger Councils Fund that's in there. There is a number of major projects in there as well. So we've got the Ashfield Swimming Pool and we've got the Ashfield Town Centre, Marrickville Hospital site, just off the top of my head. So there is a number of large major projects as a part of bringing together councils' asset management plans and whatnot. I'm sure that there'll be an opportunity to identify some larger major projects out there in the future. So, there is that trend at this point in time. But again, those numbers will get cemented in as we build a more robust long-term financial plan. So, cool. I think that answers everything. The libraries, just with the libraries, I think it is noted that operationally, and John might be able to back me up on this, but there is an element of heritage being allocated towards that budget. There are staff nominated to that as well, so they are working through that meticulously, and they are working they're bringing it together and working on that to make sure they preserve what they can. So that's it, I think. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you, Pat, for that response. So the idea, I think, of having a public meeting as part of the consultation process, and Michael's very keen on this, so at least a public meeting. We'll see whether we need more than that, but I'll make an amendment to the recommendation. So it becomes new number 3, that a public meeting or meetings be held as part of the consultation process. I do think it's a good idea to get out there and talk with people about what's proposed. I've just made a minor change to, I've got a few things that I want to see added in there, like reference to our domestic violence program, like acknowledgement of the continued funding of the Westconnex unit. So subject to minor administrative changes, there's a number of small changes that I've given to Michael to reflect what council's delivering in terms of programs and priorities, but no substantive changes to any of the capital works program or other items in there. But subject to that, I will adopt that recommendation and get that on public exhibition very shortly, with a view for it coming back to council and LRAC in June. Yeah, so thank you all very much for that. So I actually have only a single registered speaker for item 13. Other than that, I don't have any pre-registered speakers for any of the other items. So what I'm going to do is ask if there is anyone in the chamber who wants to speak on any other items on the agenda other than item 13, which I've got Frank Breen speaking on. But other than that, do we have any speakers for items 5 through to 12 and item 14? If any speakers on those, and if not, then okay, no speakers, so I can move and adopt the recommendations en bloc in those reports. And that just leaves us with item 13, which is the Inner West Council Investment Report. And as I said, I've got Frank Breen registered to speak, so over to Frank.
Yes, thank you for that. My focus again is on the non-fossil fuel investments, and it's been the subject of an email between myself and you and a reply that I've got back, which states that it's going to be the subject of a report to the next LRAC. But I just wanted to emphasise that, firstly, that that does seem to be a bit of long time coming. That's going to be May, and the amalgamation, it'll be the 12 months since we amalgamated. And I was looking at the earlier reports, and the February council meeting showed that as at the 31st of January, the total of the non-fossil fuel investments as a proportion of our investments was 57%. We're now back to 54%. And I made the point in the email that I forwarded to you that Leichhardt had a target of 60% and that we're going to review the situation at that time to see if we could go further and what the implications might be. Just reflecting back on the report of the February meeting, Leichhardt was actually at 60%. So I guess when you think about it, that should have triggered a review at that particular time. But not to say that a review is not wanted, but particularly at the moment when we've got environmental issues such as the Adani proposal for the Carmichael coalfields mine, and people are actually on the street complaining and protesting to the major banks about their proposed support for that sort of investment. And here we are, the Inner West Council that's had this policy all this time of going to higher and higher levels of divesting from fossil fuel ADIs, flies in the face of what's happening publicly. And I wouldn't like us to be the target of a criticism, and protest ourselves for actually not taking that into account. Now, I appreciate that that the former Marrickville Council may have had a slightly different policy in this regard, but I would have thought that in the light of the current circumstances that we would have, instead of depositing the money with the Commonwealth Bank that led us back from 57% to 54%, ultimately, we would have perhaps stayed with putting it into non-fossil fuel investments, which would have been in line with the Leichhardt policy. And the fact that the money may have come from the Marrickville source, I don't think is really relevant. I think it is taking into account the, what's happening in the public arena. And I know people will be outside the other banks, the major banks.
Another minute, Frank?
Yes, I'll finish up very shortly. I think that we should act without further delay on this, and that I would urge that the things that are brought to the LRAC reflect the former Leichhardt Council position of, trying to get above that 60%. I think it's a very topical issue at the moment, and it was in the press. Some of the things I was reading on the way here about there's a lot of pressure on investors, or investors are placing a lot of pressure on the major financial institutions to divest from funding. So it's not just us. So I look forward to the report for the next LRAC meeting.
Thank you, Frank. Any other speakers on this item? Okay, I'm going to ask Michael Zamoulis, the Deputy General Manager, to respond.
Through the Administrator. Thank you, Frank. No, I appreciate there's a lot of interest in non-fossil fuel investments, particularly the Adani mine right now. I probably haven't done a great job at explaining the circumstances that we're in. One of the challenges that we have is we do actually operate on three policies. We have the Ashfield policy, we have the Marrickville policy, and we have the Leichhardt, and plus the Leichhardt Council resolution, which had a resolution to progress towards 100% non-fossil fuel. So we use all those three policies and apply those to each of the constituent councils. In the case of Marrickville, it specifically states, and I can be corrected by our CFO if I get this wrong, it specifically states that preference will be given to non-fossil fuel investments as long as the net return is no worse off than another investment. In the case of the CBA funds, we could not, our financial advisors could not find a non-fossil fuel investment that had a higher rate of return than the CBA funds. We are very conscious of the percentage. I think the percentage is one aspect of it. We actually have $115.7 million worth of non-fossil fuel investments. One of the things we're actually looking at right now is how we do get above the 60%. I have a a review that's being done by our Prudential, by our financial advisors, to progress beyond the 60%. It will take us somewhere till about May 2019 before we have some of the bonds from Leichhardt mature, before we can get well above well into the 60% range. So our time horizon is going to be about 2 years before we get, say, around 65 to 70%.
Thank you, Michael. And look, I did ask for advice from the staff on this myself, and I was heartened by the fact that I think we're ranked 3rd in the state, councils-wise, in terms of our non-fossil fuel investment. I can't remember 1 and 2, but
Ballina and Tweed.
Ballina and Tweed
As
were
a percentage.
As a percentage of the 100% investment.
Ballina only has about $71 million of investments in total. We have over 200 million. So our non-fossil fuel investments of 116 are well above their actual total investments.
But look, I think it's a good point that we're not hiding our light on this issue. We are doing well. We can do better. And that's the subject of the report to LRAC, which I've been promised for May. So we will discuss that at the May meeting of LRAC. And in the meantime, I'll receive and note this report and bid you adieu. That concludes the council meeting in record time for Inner West Council. So thank you very, very much, everybody, for attendance, including those watching on YouTube, and see you in May. Thank you very much.